Welcome to the Future is Freelance podcast, bringing together the best minds from the freelance ecosystem. We honor the expertise that comes from all levels, from freelancer to platform CEO, from community builder to enterprise leader. Together, we'll define the future of work. If you value this content, there are two ways you can support it. Follow this podcast wherever you get it and leave a positive review, or share the podcast with a friend. Find out more about our movement, including live events, coaching, and tons more content at fruitioninitiatives.com. Thanks for being part of the movement. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
I am great. How are you?
Amazing.
We were just talking about the summer shifts before we record. That's definitely state of mind that I'm in this time of year for sure. So I'm super excited to be able to have a conversation with you today. We connected. How did we connect? Oh, we connected because of someone at MBO Partners. And then who realized that we both lived in Colorado. So that's nice to have the local connection. But I always love being able, I think, and we talked about this the first time we chatted. I think a lot of folks, the number one piece of advice I always give freelancers is talk to your quote unquote competitors. And everyone's always like, why? How? How do I even approach that conversation? And I think you and I it's pretty close in terms of what we do and who we work with. I think the way we do it is a tiny bit different, but
Yeah.
I always think it's really nice to be able to talk to people who do pretty much the exact same thing you do and just be able to see how other people are thinking about it and break down those myths about quote unquote competition, because I think they're the uniqueness that each person brings to the work that they do makes it so that there's always going to be people that find a better fit with one person over another, even if they do quote unquote the same thing.
Oh, I so agree. I think really thinking about it from the perspective of there are plenty of clients for everyone, and that's something that I love teaching my independent consultants that I work with. You may do the same with your clients, just having an abundant mindset and thinking about there's plenty of work for all of us, and how can we collaborate and connect with each other to share ideas about and share best practices and commiserate maybe a little bit and all
Yeah.
of those things. It's so good. This can be a lonely job, so it's so good to have these types of relationships. So I'm so happy that we've connected.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so I'm gonna put a bookmark on that so we can come back to it too, because there's so much more to say about that piece of it. But before we go too far, let's just get you to do the three questions that we ask everyone at the top. Who are you? What is your work? And why do you do it?
Okay, amazing. My name is Melisa Liberman, and I am an a business coach for independent consultants. So I work with independent consultants to help them really create an engine to run their business. So all of us are so good at delivering for clients and working with our end clients. The part that can be really challenging for independent consultants is the business, running the business side, how to create leads for ideal clients that they're able to then turn into contracts and price in a way that doesn't mean that they're tying up and trading time for money and those kinds of things. So that's what I do, is really help independent consultants to create and put process in place so that they've got a more predictable, sustainable business that feels balanced for them and that they're on track to meet the goals that they've set for themselves and really realize what beyond whatever they maybe even imagined was possible. So that is what I do. And why I do it, I started out in corporate consulting. So I worked at Accenture and went through that whole boot camp early on in my career and really loved it. I loved the consulting work. I did not love the travel. And so I switched over to a startup company. And at that startup company, I was the employee number 3, I think. And so I just had to wear so many different hats. And it evolved to me running all of the global professional services organization, responsible for consultants that were deploying our software around the world and also the product itself. And I've always been in consulting and love consulting so much. About 12 years ago, the company that I helped to start was becoming more of a mid-size organization, a lot more bureaucracy. And around that same time, my husband had a job opportunity in Hawaii. And so I begrudgingly, this sounds really weird now when I say it back, but I begrudgingly resigned and agreed to move to Hawaii. I realize no one is feeling sorry for me, and at this point, it's laughable. But the point is, I really didn't want to leave my corporate career. I was on the path to be a COO and a CEO and all the things, and that was super important to me, and the identity and path around that was so important. But I agreed to move to Hawaii, and I thought I would be a stay-at-home mom. That lasted for maybe 4 days or so. That's not my thing. I'm not that good. That's a hard job. But luckily my former company asked me to stay on as on retainer as a management and strategy consultant. And the thought had never crossed my mind. And I'm so grateful that they brought up that idea. And so that's when I became an independent consultant just by accident. And from there, it has evolved. That was 12 years ago. And I did for probably the first 6 or 7 years, I worked with startups, helping them scale and operationalize the work that they do and hire really impactful teams to execute the work. But at the same time, I kept getting all these questions from the executive team. I can't get the CEO to do get him to do what I want. All of these interpersonal challenges they were having, and I just really loved that coaching side of it. And I decided to really marry together the things I love, which are coaching and building businesses, and merge those together. And that's how I became a coach for independent consultants, which is what I've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years. And love it. Love helping other independents succeed so they don't have to go back to corporate unless they really want to.
I love it. There's so many things I want to touch on there. So the first one is tell us. I think there's so many definitions, so much terminology out there. Some people use the word freelancer, some people use the word consultant. Do actually think there is a difference between a freelance. There's an overlapping Venn diagram, but I think consultant is fundamentally like a different thing. I'm curious, when you say the word consultant, like how do you define that word as differentiated from like other types of independent workers, like
Mm.
freelancers, for instance?
Yeah. It is such a there's so many different words out there. It took me a while to even figure out how to label my podcast. So I don't know exactly how people even call themselves in this space. I never really thought of myself or called myself an independent consultant until I realized had been doing it for 6 or 7 years, I think. I just called myself a consultant perhaps. I never called myself a freelancer. I think to your point, there's so much overlap, but at the same time, what I tend to the way I tend to think about it is a lot of times freelancer it has more of a connotation around creative type roles that people take on. And so thinking about it from that perspective, to me, consultant refers a lot more to individuals in this case as independent consultants who come in to work with organizations on projects that have a specific outcome that they're looking for, and they could deliver that in a project-based work or retainer-based work, or potentially do some kind of contractor type work as well. I think is another common word, right? Contractor, consultant, freelancer, all have a slightly different connotation. So when I think about consultants, I think about those individuals who are working with clients a lot on strategy and advisory and project execution and have some specialized knowledge. How about you, Sarah? How do you think about them?
I'm 100% with you.
Yeah.
I think that when I first, which I'm exact like, our stories are very similar. I, like, accidentally became a consultant myself, and I don't even know what I called myself back then. I think I called myself a contractor,
Yeah.
because I was like it was not going to be my full-time thing. It was just, like, the thing I did until I found my next full-time 9 to 5 job. And, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think the terminology again, I think it's like a series of overlapping Venn diagrams where it's like, when I think of consultant, I do think of definitely someone who has more of a strategic focus where they're, like, helping the client uncover the needs And then in some instances, helping them execute like against that plan. Like, we've
Mhm.
uncovered the needs. Here's what we need to do. Now let's do it. But I also think that there's plenty of quote unquote people who would call themselves freelancers who fall into those categories. And then the word that I sort of use interchangeably with both of those is solopreneur, which is also, I think, has different connotations when you think
Mhm.
about people who might be coaches or content creators or
Mhm.
authors or things like that. They might be calling. So I think it's right. I think you're absolutely right. The terminology is overlapping and it makes it hard, especially for people like us, where those are our people, where it's, but what do those people call themselves? Because I think they all call themselves something a little bit different, even though categorically they may fall into the same types of work.
Yeah, that's right. I think I was just working with a independent consultant client on this exact topic of what she calls herself. And we were working on this, and she was calling herself a fractional chief of staff and realizing that it was creating more confusion than it was doing anything positive for her. And so we were just talking about, what does the job of the title even mean? What is the job of the title? And so for us, we settled on fractional chief operating officer, COO, or fractional executive, just to do the job of keeping the door open without confusing someone. As you're thinking about introducing, if you're a consultant listening to this or a freelancer listening to this, is thinking about, how do you introduce yourself or label yourself in a way that is reflective of your skill set, but also doesn't box you in or confuse your potential client anymore than some of this already does.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think the other thing that I heard you say when you were talking about your background is, and again, our like there's some definitely overlapping themes between both of our stories, is this like shift in identity that you
Mm.
were and that you had where you were like, I was on this track, I was gonna be a COO, and then there was a sharp turn and I had and like things changed and like I said, mine was I had an accidental entrepreneur experience too, where I was just like, I can't do this thing anymore. I need some sort of like in between thing. And I'm going to figure something else out. And almost also became a COO, which is when for me, I realized I had fallen in love with being a contractor. Like I
Mm.
had fallen in love with being an independent, where I was like, working for someone wasn't, I had no idea until that moment where I was like, oh, I actually can't do this.
Yeah.
I now that I haven't worked for someone for so long, I'm not sure I can make that leap. So I'm curious, tell and I've heard this
Yeah.
from other people that I work with where they were like, so much of my identity was tied up in the going back to titles and what we call it.
Mhm.
So much of my identity was caught up in what I was in my 9 to 5 job that when I went out on my own, I had to like really completely shift the way I thought about myself, the way I described myself, the way I described what I did. So I'm curious, what did that experience look like for you taking that path and then from I was on this track and then I was like in this in between track and then I was on this track.
Yeah, I think I completely missed that this would be a problem, and it took me probably 18 months to unravel and just decompress from. There was a lot of stress and probably burnout from my corporate role, but the idea of the label and the identity I had built for myself and not even realizing how tied my confidence was to that, the corner office that I had, the title that I had, the meetings that I would get with Fortune 500 executives because of the company that I worked for. All of those things were not tied to me in my mind. They were tied to the company. And so when I left the company, I it was almost as if I had just left college and was starting over again. It was just the biggest impact was on my confidence. I didn't see myself anymore as an expert. I didn't see myself as someone who had authority or experience a wealth of experience to bring to the table. I didn't think of myself as someone that executives would still want to meet with as a potential consultant now instead of in the context of my old role. And it just felt as if I had taken myself up this from this ladder and then just fell all the way down to the bottom again. And it took a lot of intentional work around rebuilding my confidence, starting to purposefully trying to see getting myself in the headspace where I saw myself as a peer to those executives, even though I didn't have a name or a title or a label behind me, to get to the place where I thought of myself as someone who could be as valuable as a consultant from McKinsey or Accenture, even though I had none of those names behind me either. I was just an independent consultant. So it took a lot of intentional work to get back to that place. For a long time, I was doing project management work, things I could have done 1 or 2 years into my career. I was just taking whatever type of engagements would come my way from former colleagues and really under earning as a result of it, underutilizing myself as a result of it. But at the same time, realizing that there was a gap here in the way I was perceiving myself and working on that to get to the place where I felt rebuilt in some way, in a different way. Yeah.
I That description resonates with me so much, not just with my own experience, but with the experience of so many people, like I said, that I talk to, where it's like there's and it's something that you don't, no matter how you come about it, like lots of us end up as accidental consultants. Some people make a conscious decision to do it, but it is a huge mindset and identity shift that I think is sometimes underestimated. So I
Mm,
appreciate you like talking through that, because I think
yeah.
it is something that gets swept under the rug a lot, where it's just, "Oh, we were here, now we're here, and we just,
Right.
like, make this shift and everything's fine." And you're like, "No, you have to, like, completely reorient yourself to
That's
where
right.
you are now."
That's
Uh,
right.
I would love for you to tell us a little bit more, like we talked about in the beginning, like, you and I have talked a few times before, and, like, we're both coaches for, again, I think our terminology is slightly different, but tell us more about the types of people that you coach and, like, what that looks like.
Yeah. I work with, I call them, and they call themselves independent consultants who have left corporate. So they've already started their business in some form or fashion. A lot of them have landed clients, their first client or two from their former employer, like I did, from colleagues, or even former corporate clients that they had. So they have had a few projects under their belts and know that this is something they really want to pursue, and want to really build up a repeatable engine to acquire clients and figure out how to balance working on their business with working in their business as from a delivery perspective. And so those are the types of clients that I work with who are in that spot in their business. And I just really love helping them with the playbooks that they need in order to create a repeatable, replicable lead generation process, understand how to sell their work and price it in a way that doesn't, trade time for money, where they're doing retainer type work or value based pricing, and really create some strong footing for themselves that they're able then to move forward and execute against, so that they're feeling like they have a legitimate business in place and it's not just a stopgap between one corporate role to another.
Yeah. It's interesting. I feel like we work with people at a similar crossroads. Like I also often talk about, very similar to what you said. I don't work with like new freelancers, but I work
Mhm.
with people who have gotten to a place where, whether it was accidental or not, you get to this
Yeah.
place where you're like,
Yeah.
okay, like I've proved to myself that I can do it. Like it is working.
Yeah.
And, like, I'm picking up clients, even, like, similar to your story, which is very similar to mine. It's like, in the beginning, I was picking up a lot of I was, like, still am, like, mostly a project manager, but it was, like, a lot of things where I was like, "Whatever it is, I can do any of these things. It will be fine." I don't have a specific client type. I don't sell my services to a specific type of person or organization. And then you get to this juncture where you're like, that was all fine. And now I need to I've like organically gotten here. And if I'm going to get to the next place, I have to start getting more focused around the strategy, the sales, like you said, like so many things that none of us are taught to do. I feel like even if you have an MBA, you're not taught, like, no one teaches anyone how to be a solopreneur.
No.
Uh, and it's like a skill set that you learn best from people who have done it, mostly like people like you and me, or and I had some incredible mentors too, but mostly trial and error. I was just
Right.
I that thing didn't work, so I'm gonna try this thing,
Yeah.
learning from people who were slightly ahead of me. But I think that that sort of crossroads that people come to is really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's such an amazing crossroads because there's so much possibility and also a lot of fear. And a lot of it comes down to there's so many strategies you could leverage. To your point, you and I probably between us tested all of them in some way. But at the same time, it also comes down to the mindset. What you and I've learned maybe the hard way in terms of rebuilding the identity is really getting an understanding of how to intentionally create this business owner mindset, how to think differently in order to sell the work. When I first started out, I came from corporate with the idea that marketing was fluffy. I used to tease our marketing people all the time. I'm sure I don't know why they still talk to me. It was crazy looking back. But and also the CEO would call me sales repellent because I would go on sales calls as a subject matter expert in terms of what would it look like to deploy the software, and the potential clients would ask questions that I would answer very clearly and honestly and maybe too directly. And a lot of times that wasn't so appreciated. So coming from that corporate experience of being called sales repellent to the place where now I'm responsible for being responsible for marketing, which I thought was fluff, and for sales, which I thought was you had to embellish in order to be successful, and all of these kind of baggage along the way, and helping clients to unravel that because to your point, none of us are taught in corporate to wear all of those different hats, even if we came from a startup. And so figuring out how to wear all of those hats, how to think like a salesperson, how to think like a marketer, how to think like the CFO in in your organization, and really taking on all of those roles and figuring out what building the skills and the mindset to be successful in doing so. At least for me, I think is so often it's just not it's either skimmed over or completely ignored, but it's very possible to learn how to think and take action like, as you need to with all of those different roles and be successful as an independent.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I always say that it is a mindset. It's not a skill
Yeah.
set. Like
Yeah.
anyone can learn the skill set. But if you don't have the mindset, then you're not like that's the thing that is going to separate you from the people that succeed versus the people that fail because it is not like it is so much of like trial and error and like finding your own way or finding your own way by finding other people who can help you find your own way and then you're like okay I'm gonna take this from them and study it, I'm gonna study that client experience, what worked, what didn't, but it's not. I think the what I told someone a few podcasts back was the more I think about it the more I'm like I feel like freelancers might be born and not made where it's like it's just it's a mind you because again, the skill set, we all come with a skill set. Management consulting skill set, a
Yeah.
strategy skill set, a project management skill set, a graphic design skill set. But the mindset of being able to build the business and rebuild it over and over and over again is the thing that is going to keep you going.
Yeah, and it's such a shift as you're talking about this, it's such a shift from being an employee to being
Yes.
a solopreneur in this case, or a consultant or whatever, freelancer, whatever you want to call yourself, because we're taught to avoid failure, to mitigate risk, to basically play it safe in so many different ways in corporate. And now this is the opposite. That took me a really long time to start to be able to embrace failure. I remember distinctly one point in time telling someone that I've never failed, which wasn't true, but at the time I thought it was. I've never failed and I'm not about to now. And maybe at a macro level that could be true, but definitely embracing failure and embracing more of an experimental type of a mindset is so important from a success perspective, and really being able to tolerate all of the uncertainty and nuances that come with this profession that we've chosen.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So fun.
So you have also recently published a book, which I want to make sure we talk about. Tell us about it. Um, what is it about? How's it going? Tell us all about it.
Okay, amazing. What an experience. I published a book. It's called How to Grow Your Consulting Business: The 14-Step Roadmap to Make Your Independent Consulting Goals a Reality. And it is really just a compilation of what I teach my clients And the stories that I've collected over the years and working with a lot of them are my own story and a lot from other independent consultants. And I think the reason why I wrote the book in that way, it's really a combination of real life examples, strategies that are more timeless to build a business and to be successful in growing a consulting business, and also the mindset that's required to get there. And so it's really the combination of those things. And I love telling the stories. They're redacted. There's no one's real name in there. But the point is to really normalize the realities of running a consulting business and being an independent and a freelancer, because to your point, it can look really good on the outside, especially to our corporate friends, right? They can be really curious about what it is that we're doing and how we're successful at it, and it might seem really easy at some level, but at the same time, there's so many ups and downs, and even 12 years into doing this, so much self-doubt and second guessing. And so to me, writing the book was about the strategy, but more so, it was so much more about the mindset and about normalizing that this is for at least myself and the people that I talk to and work with. It's not something that is easy on a day to day basis. And so, helping to normalize that and to provide the tools to work through it, to keep going and not feel like you're being forced back to corporate. That's why I wrote it.
I love it. Is
Yeah.
there like when I especially love what you're saying about normalizing those stories of it is not all rainbows and sunshine.
Yeah.
Like there are some hard moments in this. Is there one of those like stories that stands out to you that you could
Oh,
share with us?
it to me, what is the one of the themes that I hear so often, which seems so crazy, but I can relate personally to it, is just the amount of imposter syndrome that I uncover as I'm working with independent consultants. They have they've they are doctors. They have PhDs. Went to Harvard. They worked at McKinsey in the past. If you look at the resume or on paper, you would think there's absolutely no way that this person has any form of imposter syndrome. They must be so confident. Look at what they've accomplished and all of the skill set that they must have built along the way. But when you really break it down, so often that's the biggest limiting factor, is feeling like an imposter. I don't know enough. I'm not an expert. I'm not these thought processes that we have that that come from self-doubt, that come from leaving corporate and some of the structures in place that build us up or prop us up, and those are gone. And really, so much self-doubt is left in its place. And so to me, what is so fascinating is that amount of imposter syndrome, no matter what your resume looks like or your past or your LinkedIn profile looks like. At the end of the day, we're all humans in some way. And because that's such a common thread, I think it's important, because a lot of us think I should be more I shouldn't do this, and start questioning if I should be more confident if this is something that I'm doing. And I would say the opposite is true. All of us have some doubts and questions in our mind about our capabilities and about our ability to be successful as consultants or freelancers. And knowing that's so common, then from there you can work to create more confidence and that confident mindset.
Yeah, I
Yep.
think that's perfect because also just like thinking about like you said, the people who on paper, you look at them and you're like, there's absolutely no way they could have imposter syndrome.
That's right.
For those of us who may not on paper look exactly that way, it is good to know that imposter syndrome is a thing for everyone.
Yes,
So I think we're
absolutely.
just like raising that up and being like, hey, this is something that everyone deals with.
That's
No
right.
matter what your resume looks like, no matter what your background looks like, no matter how much experience you have, it is something that everyone deals with.
Yeah.
Uh, I think that is a really great anecdote to leave us on. Thank you so much for having this conversation with us. And we'll obviously definitely link to the book, but like, where else can we find you so that everyone can find out more about you and keep in touch with you?
Thanks, Sarah. It's been so fun to be here. We have the link to the book. You can find it on Amazon as well. If you go to my website, you can download the book for free in PDF. And I also have a podcast. It's called How to Grow Your Independent Consulting Business. And yeah, and I'm also on LinkedIn. My name is missing a lot of letters. Maybe we could put the link to that in the show notes as well. Unfortunately, my parents left off a letter in my name is Melisa. And so I'm always ended up just buying all the URLs, like all the different spelling because it can get tricky. But other than that, yeah, those are the best places to find me on the website and the podcast.
Great. We will make sure to link all of those links. And thanks again for having this conversation with us.
Thanks for having me, Sarah. So good to see you.
Thanks for listening. If you value this content, please follow this podcast wherever you get it and leave us a positive review. You can also share the podcast with a friend. Find out more about everything that we do, including live events, coaching, and a lot more content at fruitioninitiatives.com.